As the world watches with bated breath, the U.S. is inching closer to a pivotal moment that could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. A surge of military assets is on the move, and tensions with Iran have never been higher. In a move that signals deepening uncertainty, the U.S. is deploying an aircraft carrier towards the region. The decision is a direct response to escalating tensions. But what is really at stake here? Why now? The USS Abraham Lincoln, currently operating in the South China Sea, may soon change course, setting its sights on the volatile Middle East. But the real question is, why is the US increasing its military presence now? What is the US hoping to accomplish? And more importantly, what could the consequences be for global security if the situation spirals out of control? As the world stands on the precipice of possible military action, all eyes are on the US president, Donald Trump, who is reportedly weighing options for a strike against Iran. The buildup of military assets isn't just a show of force. It's a signal that the US is preparing for something far more significant. The stakes are high, and the potential ripple effects on the global economy, security, and geopolitics are profound. But how did we get to this point? What's the deeper story behind this sudden increase in military movement, and what could it mean for the future? Let's dive into the heart of the matter. The US military's increased presence in the Middle East is not just a response to a single event. It's part of a broader strategy that has been unfolding for years, with the heart of the issue rooted in the complex and often volatile relationship between the US and Iran. Tensions have been simmering since the US withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, escalating further with each new development, from missile strikes to proxy warfare. The move to send an aircraft carrier is a clear demonstration of America's readiness to confront Iran, but it's also a direct reflection of long-standing geopolitical rivalries. With the US and Iran both vying for influence in the region, the stakes have only grown higher. The presence of military assets like destroyers, littoral combat ships, and missile defense systems speaks to the seriousness of the situation. This isn't a simple flex of military might. This is a carefully planned show of force that could quickly escalate into a larger conflict, depending on the moves Iran makes in the coming days. But there's more to the story. This decision is also a political gambit, one that seeks to both deter Iran and reassure US allies in the region, especially Israel. The Pentagon's actions are a response to not just Iran's moves, but also the growing instability in a region that has seen its share of conflicts. What happens next will not just affect US-Iran relations. It could have far-reaching implications for global oil markets, international alliances, and the balance of power in the Middle East. Before we jump into the potential consequences, it's crucial to understand how we got here. Let's look at the broader history of US military involvement in the Middle East and the factors that have shaped this current crisis. The seeds of the current crisis were sown decades ago, long before the USS Abraham Lincoln was rerouted to the Middle East. The relationship between the US and Iran has been anything but stable, marked by moments of cooperation, but mostly by conflict and suspicion. The pivotal moment came in 1979, when Iran's Islamic Revolution led to the overthrow of the US-backed Shah, marking the beginning of a long-standing animosity. The subsequent US Embassy hostage crisis set the tone for years of mistrust. From that point on, US-Iran relations have been shaped by sanctions, military confrontations, and proxy wars. The Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, the Gulf War in the 1990s, and the 2003 invasion of Iraq only deepened the divide. The relationship took a dramatic turn with the signing of the Iran nuclear deal in 2015 under President Obama, which sought to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions in exchange for relief from international sanctions. However, in 2018, President Trump pulled out of the agreement, reimposing harsh sanctions on Iran. This decision shifted the geopolitical landscape, reigniting the tensions that have now come to a head. Fast forward to today, and Iran is once again a central player in a volatile region. The U.S. has consistently viewed Iran's nuclear program and its support for proxy groups as existential threats to regional stability and American allies. In response, Iran has grown increasingly defiant, fueling a cycle of confrontation and retaliation. The current military buildup is just the latest chapter in a long history of attempts to contain Iran's regional influence. But history alone doesn't explain the urgency of the current moment. Let's turn to the present crisis and examine the immediate events that are pushing both nations to the brink. A flashpoint in the ongoing U.S. Iran tensions came earlier this year, when the U.S. accused Iran of engaging in actions that directly threatened American interests and allies in the region. These actions, which included missile attacks and assaults on shipping vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, forced the U.S. to reconsider its strategy in the Middle East. This isn't just another minor skirmish in the region. The U.S. military is now actively mobilizing, sending aircraft carriers, destroyers, and missile defense systems in an attempt to assert dominance and warn Iran that their actions will not go unchecked. The positioning of military assets is part of a broader plan to bolster U.S. defenses and ensure regional stability. Yet it's also a clear sign of growing concern that the situation is spiraling out of control. Behind the scenes, President Trump has been weighing the option of direct military strikes. If carried out, these would be more offensive than previous actions, with military planners reportedly preparing a range of aggressive options. The question on everyone's mind is, what will it take for this to escalate into full-blown conflict? To understand the potential consequences, we must examine the deeper mechanisms that are driving this conflict. What lies beneath the surface of these military movements, and how does the U.S. perceive Iran's actions? Let's explore the hidden forces at play. On the surface, it may seem like a simple escalation of military assets. An aircraft carrier here, a missile defense system there. But the truth is, the conflict between the U.S. and Iran is fueled by far deeper, more intricate mechanisms. At the heart of this escalation is the balance of power in the Middle East. The U.S. has long maintained a strategy of deterrence, keeping Iran in check through a combination of sanctions, military presence, and diplomatic pressure. But as Iran's influence continues to grow, especially through its alliances with proxy groups across the region, the U.S. finds itself facing a shifting power dynamic. The military presence isn't just about defense. It's about reaffirming U.S. dominance and ensuring that Iran's actions don't tip the balance in favor of their regional ambitions. Moreover, Iran's nuclear program remains a key flashpoint. While the U.S. officially ended the Iran nuclear deal, Iran has continued its nuclear development at an accelerated pace, openly defying international norms. This creates an existential threat to the U.S. and its allies, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, who view Iran's nuclear capability as a direct threat to their security. Behind the scenes, the military-industrial complex plays a role in the decisions being made. With a substantial defense budget at stake, the U.S. military's ability to maintain a strong presence in the region is often seen as a tool of influence, not just for the government, but for corporations and defense contractors who benefit from military engagements. This complex web of geopolitics, economic interests, and military strategy adds layers of complexity to what may appear as a simple military buildup. But despite all these behind-the-scenes dynamics, the situation is far from settled. In fact, tensions are mounting, and the region is teetering on the brink of another mini-crisis. What happens next could change everything. Let's take a closer look at the second wave of escalation. As military assets continue to flow into the region, the tension reaches a boiling point. Iran's actions in recent weeks, particularly its missile attacks on shipping vessels and aggressive moves in the Strait of Hormuz, have sent shockwaves through the global community. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a calculated effort by Iran to assert itself on the world stage. The U.S. response has been swift, but the threat is far from over. In fact, many military analysts warn that the real test will come if and when Iran chooses to escalate further. Could this lead to open conflict? Or is the U.S. simply positioning itself to strengthen its negotiating hand? What happens next will depend largely on the decisions made by the leaders of both countries. The U.S. is preparing for the possibility of military strikes, but the ripple effects could be catastrophic. If the U.S. were to launch an offensive, it would not just affect Iran, but would reverberate throughout the entire Middle East, sparking conflicts with proxy forces and potentially drawing in U.S. allies. And beyond the immediate fallout, this could drastically impact the global oil market, considering the region's central role in energy production. The clock is ticking. As the U.S. military continues to position its assets, the stakes become higher with each passing day. The impact of these developments won't just be felt in the military sphere. It will hit the very people who live in the region. What will this mean for the ordinary citizens caught in the crossfire? Let's turn our attention to the human cost of this escalating conflict. As the U.S. and Iran position themselves for a possible military clash, the true cost of these escalating tensions is not only measured in missiles or military maneuvers. The lives of millions of ordinary people are hanging in the balance. For the citizens of Iran, the daily realities of living under sanctions and a strained economy have already been harsh. But a full-scale military conflict could plunge the country into chaos, with devastating consequences for its already fragile infrastructure and healthcare system. The prospect of collateral damage, the destruction of vital resources, and the humanitarian toll of warfare would be catastrophic. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, U.S. allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia are also bracing for potential repercussions. Both nations face a direct threat from Iran's growing military influence, and they understand all too well the consequences of a power vacuum. For ordinary citizens in these countries, the fear of retaliation, terror attacks, or proxy wars is very real. The human cost of this escalating conflict is not just a distant possibility, it's an ever-present reality for millions living in the shadow of these tensions. And then there are the American troops who are on the ground or being deployed to the region. Many of them are far from home, caught in the midst of a geopolitical conflict they didn't choose. The psychological toll of such a deployment, the threat of violence, and the uncertainty of the future weigh heavily on their lives and families. CTA. This isn't just about politics or military strategy. It's about the real people who will bear the brunt of these decisions. The actions taken in the coming days could determine whether countless innocent lives are caught in the crossfire. But the impact doesn't stop at the regional level. This conflict could have far-reaching effects on global stability. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. Let's now examine the global repercussions. As the U.S. increases its military presence in the Middle East, the repercussions of this conflict are already being felt far beyond the region. The geopolitical consequences of a potential military strike against Iran could reverberate across the globe, touching everything from energy markets to international diplomacy. One of the most immediate impacts would be on the global oil supply. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of the world's oil passes, could become a battleground, disrupting global energy markets. A military strike could push oil prices to new heights, causing a ripple effect that could negatively impact economies worldwide, particularly those already struggling with inflation and post-pandemic recovery. The global economy is intricately tied to the flow of energy, and any disruption could have far-reaching consequences. Diplomatically, a military conflict could strain U.S. alliances and destabilize international relations. Russia, China, and the European Union would all have stakes in the outcome of the conflict. Russia and China have long supported Iran, and their reaction to any U.S. military action could escalate tensions between these global powers, leading to a broader geopolitical standoff. European countries, while largely supporting U.S. sanctions on Iran, would be caught in the crossfire as they balance their diplomatic ties with both the U.S. and Iran. Finally, the rise of extremist groups in the aftermath of any military action cannot be underestimated. The power vacuum left by such a conflict could give rise to further instability, with terrorist organizations seizing the opportunity to expand their influence in a region already marked by violence and uncertainty. The global security landscape could change overnight as countries scramble to protect their interests in the wake of a Middle Eastern conflict. The future of this conflict remains uncertain, but there are a few potential scenarios we must consider. Will this escalation lead to a full-blown war, or can tensions be diffused before it's too late? Let's look at the three possible futures that could emerge from this crisis. As the U.S. and Iran stare down this perilous path, the future of the Middle East and the world hinges on the decisions made in the coming days. What could the future hold? Let's explore three potential scenarios, one optimistic, one cautious, and one catastrophic. The best case, de-escalation and diplomacy. In the best case scenario, tensions between the U.S. and Iran de-escalate without further military action. The show of force from the U.S. serves as a deterrent, while behind-the-scenes diplomatic efforts manage to restart negotiations on nuclear weapons and regional security. Iran, under increasing pressure, agrees to return to the negotiating table, perhaps even re-entering some form of a nuclear agreement that allows for more transparency and economic relief. The world breathes a sigh of relief as the immediate threat of military conflict fades. This scenario would involve significant diplomatic effort, with the U.S. and its allies finding common ground on how to address Iran's nuclear ambitions, its regional influence, and its role in destabilizing neighboring countries. The result would be a fragile but crucial peace that stabilizes the region and avoids a global crisis. 2. The middle ground, a limited conflict. The second scenario is a limited military conflict, where the U.S. carries out targeted strikes against Iranian military infrastructure, perhaps focusing on missile sites or nuclear facilities. Casualties would be fewer, but the conflict would still have serious repercussions. The strikes could lead to a temporary power shift, with the Iranian regime temporarily weakened but not toppled. This scenario would also likely lead to a surge in proxy warfare, as Iran's allies and militant groups retaliate across the region. The global economy would suffer from the disruption to oil supply, and international relations would be strained. But the conflict could remain contained to the Middle East. The world would face months, if not years, of uncertainty, but the worst-case outcome could still be avoided. 3. The worst case, full-scale war. In the worst-case scenario, the situation spirals out of control, and the U.S. and Iran enter into full-scale war. The U.S. strikes multiple targets across Iran, and in retaliation, Iran launches missile attacks on U.S. military bases and possibly Israel. The conflict would widen, drawing in regional allies and potentially global powers. The Middle East would become a battleground, destabilizing neighboring countries like Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, and further threatening global security. The economic impact would be devastating, with oil prices skyrocketing and economies worldwide entering recession. The humanitarian cost would be immense, with millions displaced, countless lives lost, and widespread destruction. A global war could become a reality, not just a regional conflict, and the consequences would echo for generations. No matter the outcome, the consequences of the decisions made today will shape the future of the Middle East and the global order for years to come. As we close this analysis, let's reflect on the insights gained from this critical moment. As we stand on the edge of an uncertain future, the question remains, what kind of world do we want to shape? The actions taken in the coming days will not only affect the U.S. and Iran, but could define the global order for decades. The Middle East, already a tinderbox, could become the flashpoint for a conflict with repercussions far beyond its borders. The U.S. has a range of options, but each one carries risks that could lead to either a fragile peace or a devastating war. For Iran, the path forward could either involve cooperation and diplomacy or escalation and destruction. The world is watching, waiting for the next move. As citizens of the world, we must ask ourselves, how much more can we afford to lose? The global community must come together, pressuring both sides to seek peace over warfare, dialogue over destruction. Leaders must make decisions that prioritize human life and regional stability over power struggles and geopolitical maneuvering. This is not just a political issue, it's a matter of survival. For the people of the Middle East, for the economies of the world, and for the stability of the global order, we must find a way forward, and we must find it quickly.